Okay, so good morning, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to Javier Madero, who is the lead attorney at EMLA. Some of you might know him from working with him before, but today he's going to be talking about some very important changes that came into effect in January that are going to affect buyers and sellers. So Javier, I don't want to talk anymore, so I'll hand it over to you.
Write his name down.
Thank you, Emma. Hello, everyone. It's always a pleasure to give this type of presentations. I really enjoy providing information about new regulations in general. So yes, I mean, I look forward to this. I'm gonna give you guys a presentation that I have prepared with the information that I have, and then at the end we can do a question and answer section in case you guys have any questions or comments or any type of concern, so we can go over. All right. Emma, would you mind sharing, making me host so I can share my screen?
I think you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Okay. So the whole presentation is going to be about the new tax regulations, specifically and more specifically about the new tax appraisal that was implemented by the government. And then I'm gonna explore a little bit regarding or the contrast between the commercial appraisal and a regular appraisal, and then we can go from there. All right. I'm gonna also be explaining the increasement that we had or that we experienced within Los Cabos municipality of the acquisition tax going from 2 to 3%. I mean, there's really not a lot to explain in that part, but I'll mention it nonetheless. I think the more crucial or the technical part is the appraisal regulations that were passed at the beginning of the year or at the last part of last year. All right. So yes, this presentation will try to help us understand the tax implications of the new tax appraisal. It will also explain the rule 2.1.38, and I'll explain a little bit how these tax amendment packages, how they work here in Mexico. Just kind of like an extra piece of information that I want to throw out there. All right. But basically, this rule specifies that appraisals can be valuation units, and appraisals will be required, or they've always been required, but now they're going to be more required for taxing purposes on the buyer side for what we know as reverse capital gains tax, and I'll get to that part in a little bit. All right. As I was saying in what I first wanted to explain is the tax amendment packages, or miscelánea fiscal, or fiscal miscellaneous packages. Basically, what these are, this refers to a new set of tax amendments and provisions that the government proposes and approves every year. They typically adjust and update the country's tax regulations. They're not new tax laws. They're not new. There are no new tax laws in general. They're just amendments or modifications to the ones that have already existed. So, for instance, you can modify the tax laws, such as like the capital gains tax law or the value-added tax law, etc. So this will be presented by the executive power, which is the president, to the federal Congress, and the Congress will pass it. But it usually gets discussed around October of every year, and they're specifically for next year. So everything that gets discussed throughout the year, it gets sent through this package, it gets approved, and it gets effective on the next year. All right. So that's what the rule 2.138 is referring to. So it's one of the amendment. It's part of the tax amendment packages that were sent at the end of last year in order to be implemented this year. All right. All right. So what does the rule 2.138 say? It was a bit confusing for a lot of attorneys and a lot of notaries the end of last year because it was a bit ambiguous, to be honest with you. And I really want to start with that part. I mean, there was a lot of back and forth with a commercial operation being requested by the federal government. That's something that I want to say in just a parenthesis. These regulations are of federal character, meaning that they are not implemented by the state government, but by the federal government. All right. So again, a lot of attorneys and a lot of notaries throughout the country, we had a lot of confusion in regards to the type of appraisal that was going to be needed for real estate transactions in general. The Rule 2.138 states that an appraisal is going to be needed to calculate a possible capital gains tax for the buyer. Now, capital gains tax, and just as a briefly way to explain it, is simply a tax that is implemented or a burden that is implemented to anyone that has a gain, regardless if it's from a sale or from a purchase. I mean, the way that the government sees it is that if you make a gain out of certain activity, you gotta pay taxes on it. All right. So if you acquire a property that is worth more than what you're paying for, technically you're making a gain, therefore you should be paying a tax. All right. So having said that, the Rule 2.1.38 states that appraisals will be made or will be performed by valuation units or by certified professionals. It will introduce an additional tax burden, which is the reverse capital gains tax on the difference between the purchase price and the appraised value. Now, again, there was a lot of back and forward saying that a commercial appraisal was going to be needed. Nonetheless, the tax doesn't really specify that a commercial appraisal is going to be needed. It just says that a professional appraisal is going to be sufficient or needed for compliance and to state the tax that is paid. Now, before I go into this next part, I also want to clarify that notaries on here are the ones that are responsible for the collection of taxes. So this law was actually sent to the notaries in order for the notaries to start implementing them. And they are to now ensure that this appraisal is provided or is issued in order for them to then collect the reverse capital gains tax if there is one. All right. And again, I'll get into it in a little while, but just as a brief reminder, the reverse capital gains tax is the tax that is paid on the gain from the acquisition of a property. So basically, if a property is worth more than the purchase price, you pay a tax. All right. Now, again, the Rule 2.1.38 doesn't specify that a commercial appraisal is needed. It does say that an appraisal is needed for sure, but doesn't say anywhere that a commercial appraisal is needed. It also sends you to a different law, and it states that the appraisal has to be in compliance with the regulations of the income tax law in Mexico, which also doesn't really say that it has to be a commercial appraisal. It just specifies the type of requirements that these appraisals and the appraisers have to have in order for these documents to be valid. All right. Now, having said that, a professional appraisal will ensure that regulatory compliance, and the commercial and versus a commercial appraisal, which obviously will come back at a higher rate than a regular appraisal. What I'm trying to say is that a regular appraisal will just take into consideration construction, the type of finishes that a property have, the type of equipment that a property has, but it won't take into consideration a lot of the factors that a commercial appraisal will take in consideration, such as the location.
Can I just say something here? Because I think there's what some people might think is an appraisal is different to what an appraisal is here. So an appraisal here is not the appraisal that's done at the beginning to value your house. It's the appraisal done at the end to make sure that the house is what it's selling for. And that's done at the end of the transaction. And what's happened is there's been a professional appraisal that's happened all the time with properties here. But the government just introduced another layer, which was the commercial appraisal, which basically means that it's an added appraisal on top of it. And they might be then saying, okay, well, actually, it's worth more. and then the buyer gets subject to reverse capital gains. So that's the difference between the appraisals that you might be used to and the ones that are here. This one's at the end. From what I know or gather, the appraisal that's done in the States is done to set the value of the home.
Right. Nonetheless, I do have to specify that a commercial appraisal will not be needed. That's one of the things that I want to clarify. So the law doesn't establish anywhere that a commercial appraisal specifically will be needed for these purposes. So it's a different type of appraisal, which I just want to call it like that, appraisal, because it's not exactly a commercial one. So it will not be as bad as we thought it was going to be. They will come back higher than the regular appraisals, which are the ones that we've been working with lately, which, as Emma explained, they're just an appraisal providing general information of the property and how much they're worth at the eyes of the government. I mean, these new appraisals will come back higher, but not as high as a commercial appraisal, because the commercial one will.
I have a question. Excuse me. When you say commercial, is that the same as the professional appraisal that's on the screen?
No.
No. Okay.
Yes, no. A professional appraisal will be the one that is going to be required for these new tax regulations.
And you've been saying a commercial appraisal, what is that?
So the commercial appraisal is it's a different type of appraisal, which takes in consideration commercial values, such as the location of the property, the amenities that a property may have.
Okay. Got it.
So I think that when we organized this Zoom call, everybody was under the impression that the commercial appraisal was going to be this extra layer that we were going to have to contend with, and it could be bad for buyers because they were going to have to pay reverse capital gains. But since we started organizing the meeting, the good news is that it looks like it's not enforceable or it's not happening, Javier, is that right? Or
that is correct, and that's exactly what I'm trying to explain here. I mean, there was a lot of fear about this new commercial appraisal, but it's not going to be required. So what it's going to be required is a professional appraisal, which is different than a commercial appraisal.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Now, this professional appraisal is more focused on pre-construction or donation transactions more than regular transactions or resales and stuff like that. It's specifically because pre-construction and donations typically have a gain for the person that is acquiring the property. I mean, in donation, obviously, the person that is acquiring the property has a gain regardless of the type of property that we have. I mean, if somebody gives me a simple good like a pen, it makes me be a little bit richer somehow, right? So it's the same thing with properties that comes with donations. Regardless if it's a very, very small piece of property or a big one, the net worth of the person that is acquiring that property is increasing and therefore will be taxed, and that's what this professional appraisal will do. It will create a base for that tax to be paid on the acquisition of that property. Okay. And it will also affect pre-construction purchases, because as we all may know, if I buy something, or one of the beauties of pre-construction is that I get to buy something 20 or 30% less than the commercial value of a property. So technically, you're also making a gain on that. I mean, the law doesn't really specify that this regulation is more focused on pre-construction or donations. Nonetheless, that's pretty much the way it is. I mean, definitely the two sections that I think will be more affected on with this new regulation are these two: pre-construction and donation transactions.
Javier, just as an illustration, if there's somebody's buying a $500,000 pre-construction, and the assessor, the appraiser comes along and says, "Well, actually, we think it's worth 600,000." Could that happen?
Yes, it could happen. Especially,
so who does so then the buyer pays that tax?
Yes, the buyer pays that tax, and especially if pre-construction properties are bought, just like you said it yourself, in a certain value, and then at the moment of the closing, they're worth more because now they're completely built. And at that point is where these appraisal will come into place, and we'll be assessing the value of the property, and if it is more than the purchase price, then that tax will come into place. Now, in order for the tax to be come into place, I'll show that in a little while, but just anticipating myself for the purposes of this explanation. In order for the tax to be implemented, the appraisal has to assess the value of the property on, it has to come back 10% or higher than the purchase price. So if the purchase price is 100,000 and the appraisal comes back at 110,000, then the reverse capital gains tax will come into play. The reverse capital gains tax will be paid based on the difference between the 10% and whatever extra percentage we have resulting of the appraisal. All right. Just as a quick example, if the purchase price is 100,000 and the commercial price comes back at 120,000, then the difference between 110 and 120 will be taxed. Okay.
And when will they know
what
this?
percent?
Will that be at the end?
No. Well, technically, yes, at the end. Nonetheless, almost every other closing attorney requests the appraisal as one of the first parts of the process in order to provide like a heads up to the buyer, so the buyer can know if there is going to be a reverse capital gains tax or not. Now, the thing with pre-construction is that you cannot really do this appraisal until the condominium regime is in place, which is the legal part of a development. I think somebody had a question.
Yeah, at what percent the difference will be taxed?
20%.
20%. So this case, that the seller or the buyer will pay 2,000 extra, correct? As reverse capital gain taxes.
Yes, exactly. So with that example that we just mentioned, that is correct. So if the purchase price is 100,000 and if the appraisal comes back at 120, the difference between 110 and 120 will be taxed, which is 10. And then from there we take 20%. So it will be 2,000, correct? All right. Now, part of the requirements to issue one of these appraisals is that they have to be issued by recognized appraisal or licensed appraisals, which include registered brokers. In other words, those are federal notaries, credit institution, and certified professionals. And certified professionals are actually the ones that everyone is using, because they're actually the same ones that issue the cadastral appraisals, which are the ones that we are all used to for real estate transactions. And the cadastral appraisal is the one that is used for property taxes, which is different than the acquisition tax. So a certified professional will be enough to issue these appraisals. All right. They also have to be registered and have a valuation expertise, meaning that they would have had to go to school or would have to get a diploma in order to issue these type of appraisals, and must follow the accepted valuation standards of the Mexican regulations, also according to the international regulations for valuations. Okay. The professional license will ensure the accountability and the ethical compliance according to the Rule 2.1.38, and will present the appraisal to the notary, who also has to collect the information and so. Again, the appraiser or the professional will not calculate the tax. They will only issue the appraisal, and the notary will calculate the taxes according to the appraisal that it is being presented to them. All right. And the rule allows independent appraisals in order to follow the fiscal guidelines or tax guidelines. Now, another requirements or some other points within this rule is that appraisals will be valid for 1 year. They're also going to be conducted by authorized professionals or institutions, as we just mentioned. and they have to be registered within the competent authority. That means that they have to be validated by the government. They have to get a license, or whoever issues the appraisal has to have a license for this type of appraisal, in order for them to issue one. So I've seen, and I do want to make a parenthesis here, I've seen a lot of appraisals that are just documents that will assess a value of a property, but they do not have any type of validity because they don't have the legal requirements that the law requires, such as being registered within the federal authorities, or having the stamp that they need in order to complete this type of appraisal. So we always have to be a little bit picky with who we work with in order to ensure that these appraisals are actually valid for tax purposes.
Sorry, Javier, I'm just being very cynical here, but aren't they going to try and find the value higher so that the government can get more money?
Yes, I mean,
Good
that's
question.
what the commercial appraisal will do, but that's what made a lot of people afraid, because a commercial appraisal will definitely assess the property at a very high value, and will almost every time cause a reverse capital gains tax. Nonetheless, as we've been saying, a commercial appraisal will not be needed, just a professional one. Then the professional one will not take in consideration commercial aspects of the property, such as like the infrastructure that surrounds the property, like the services that the property has. So all of those will not be taken in consideration. We will only take in consideration certain factors that share characteristics with the commercial appraisal, but they're not quite the same. I mean, they do not take all of these other considerations that a commercial one will take. So if it's a regular transaction, like a purchase transaction for a piece of property, I don't think that a reverse capital gains tax will come into place, only if it's a very cheap property and it's being it's being sold for opportunity, let's call it like that, or for pre-construction or donations, or even for inheritance and stuff like that. So reverse capital gains tax, the technical word for that would be capital gains tax on the acquisition of a property. As I explained a few minutes ago, the capital gains tax is payable when the purchase price is 10% or more below the appraised value. So as I explained, if the appraisal is 10% more if the appraised value is 10% more than the purchase price, then there will be a reverse capital gains tax. Now, who pays this reverse capital gains tax is the buyer, because technically it's an acquisition tax. Well, it's kind of like an acquisition tax, but it's based on the gain on the buyer who acquires the property. And it will apply to free transfers of ownerships, as I was saying. So that's the main point of this rule. It will apply mostly on free transfers of ownership under certain conditions, and I didn't mention it here, but also on pre-constructions. Yes, Jesus, do you have a question?
Yes, I would like to go back on that topic about the 10%, because in the example you were giving it, the property purchasing price is 100,000, but the price comes at 120. So that 20%, it will be applied on the difference on the 20,000, or are we gonna have some kind of grace on that 10%? So, because that's the question pretty much. Are we gonna have that, any kind of grace on that percent, or if the value comes higher, we're not gonna have any type of grace, and the tax will be applied on the total difference?
It will only be applied on the difference between the 10% and whatever surpasses that 10%. So going
So
back to
whatever past the 10%, that's
Yeah.
gonna be applied on that.
exactly.
Okay.
So it would not be based on the difference between the purchase price and the commercial and the appraised value. It will be based on the difference between that 10%, like above the purchase price, and the appraised value.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yes. So if the appraisal comes, so going back to the example of the $100,000, if the appraisal comes back at $108,000, that's only 8% more than the purchase price, and therefore there will not be an acquisition tax, or sorry, a reverse capital gains tax. Even if it comes at 109,000, it will not be, only if it surpasses the 10% of the purchase price. So if it comes back at 111, then yes, there will be a tax on the difference between the 110 and the 1.
So in that case, that tax will be $200. So in that case, the tax will be $200, correct?
Sorry, exactly. So yes, only on the difference between the appraised value and the 10% that surpasses the purchase price, right?
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, and the other topic that we have, and very simply, at the end of last year, the local government, the local Congress, and this is not on the federal level, but just on the local level, the local Congress passed a law to increase the acquisition tax, the real acquisition tax, which back or before 2025, it used to be 2% of the purchase price. So the way that this tax is calculated is whatever the purchase price is, you get 2%, and then that 2% gets taxed, or sorry, you get taxed on the total purchase price 2% of that. All right. Now it just changed to be increased from 2 to 3% only in Los Cabos municipality. So if you're in Los Barriles, it will not affect you. However, it will affect you if you're like in Buenavista or the East Cape in general, or some parts of the East Cape, or Los Cabos municipality in general. The tax regulations change every year, so I cannot tell at this point if the other municipalities of Baja will follow this increase. But at this point, it only applies to Los Cabos. Now, a parenthesis on this increasement and also on the reverse capital gains tax is that you can, I mean, this is not the exact topic of this presentation. Nonetheless, selling capital gains tax have some write-offs that can be used to be reduced, to reduce that tax in the future when selling. So the 3% tax on the acquisition and also the reverse capital gains tax, that if there is one, these two can be used as a deduction or as a write-off in the future when selling the property. So you use it as a credit later. All right. So I mean, yes, you have to pay it right now if there is a reverse capital gains tax, and you also have to pay it yes or yes. There is no way to reducing it back from 3 to 2% in Los Cabos at least. But I mean, you can use that in the future to reduce your capital gains tax. All right.
Javier, just on this, just for everybody that has bought, you might remember having that 2% on your closing costs, and that's been something that's happened for many, many years. Javier, since it's gone up to 3% in Cabo County, have you seen a reduction in any transactions because of that?
No, not really. I think that what cost a little bit more of frightening was the commercial appraisal. To be very honest with you, to be very fair, it was a little bit frightening to a lot of us, because we almost given for certain that there was going to be an extra high tax for real estate transactions, but that was just in the event that we needed an actual commercial appraisal, but that is not the case. So it's not affecting anymore. And it was affecting more on pre-constructions, to be honest with you, not too much on other type of properties. All right, just as some final thoughts, as I said, or as I've been saying, a commercial appraisal would not be needed for real estate transactions. Only a licensed expert appraisal is valid, and this is under the Rule 2.1.38 of the tax amendment package that was provided at the end of last year for the year 2025. It will ensure the tax compliances, and at the same time will offer some sort of flexibility. Since it is not a commercial appraisal, it's just a professional one. Therefore, we don't think that it's going to affect regular real estate transactions, but just the ones that are free of transfer, such as donations, inheritances, or the ones that are actually cheaper than a real value of a property, such as pre-constructions. Therefore, the vast majority of transactions will still not pay these new tax burdens, and transactions will pretty much remain the same, except for the ones that I just explained. Nonetheless, an appraisal will be required. A new appraisal will be required. So yes, just keep that in mind. All right. Does anybody have questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, just a quick one. So, if we've got a developer who doesn't really know much about this now, would you say that they should get an appraisal now on what their plans are, or do they have to wait till it's built?
It would be a good idea to present the final, like maybe not the final project, but at least what the project is going to look like to a surveyor, to try to come up with an appraisal based on that. It's not going to give us the exact value of the property, because whatever it's worth now, it's not going to be worth in 2026 or 2027 whenever the developer completes the building. Nonetheless, it will give us an idea on how much these properties would be assessed now, and therefore it can give us an idea of how much reverse capital gains tax would be, if there is one. Again, it's not going to give us an accurate piece of information, but it will give us an idea.
So, acquisition taxes, commercial appraisal will be necessary when, like, the recognizing of the beneficiary in the fideicomiso, because that's a trespassing.
So no commercial appraisal will be needed in real estate transactions in general. Only when we have Mexican mortgage institutions. But even if we don't have a Mexican mortgage institution, we're not going to need a commercial appraisal at all. We will need a professional appraisal, which is different, in every single transaction, regardless if it's a donation or a recognition of trust rights, or just a regular sell and purchase transaction. So regardless of the type of transaction, this new professional appraisal will be needed. The only difference is that it's not going to be a commercial one. It's just a professional appraisal.
I have a question. Sorry to interrupt. Would you recommend that maybe this appraisal should be a contingency term in an offer to purchase?
Yes,
So-
I would recommend it for. I mean, it can be recommendable. Yes, I wouldn't 100% recommend it. I don't think in most transactions will be affecting that much to buyers. But if you as a real estate agent think that a property is cheap because it just looks undervalued for what it is, then I would definitely make it contingent. If you remember, well, back in 2021, we had a lot of issues with reverse capital gains tax and appraisal coming back very high in the East Cape area, especially the Lighthouse Point State area.
Which is where my experience with reverse capital gains has happened, yes.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I think I had one with you, Mary Jane.
That's right. You're absolutely right.
Yes, so back in 2021, the catastrophe values of Lighthouse Point State just went up the sky crazily. I don't know why, but for like 6 months it was like that. So I was recommending doing an appraisal for those transactions on empty lots within the escape area back then. Now it has come down again. I mean, it's just back to normal now. Nonetheless, as I said, if you as a if everyone here who is a real estate agent think that a property is too cheap to be real, then I would definitely perform an appraisal just to ensure that there is not going to be a reverse capital gains tax, or if there is one, at least the buyer knows ahead of it.
Right, right. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, I just don't have clear about if in the when you are the beneficiary of, let's say, your mom, your dad, and they pass away, and now you're acquiring the property by unknowledge, recognition of rights, then you will have to have a commercial appraisal that will take in place.
No, again, there's
No.
not going to be a
No,
need for
okay.
a short appraisal,
Okay.
never.
What about if in Mexican to Mexican, like I had the land from my dad and he just donated to me, which I wish, but
A commercial appraisal would not be needed.
So it won't be needed either.
No, a commercial one, no. A professional appraisal, yes, will be needed, but it's different than a commercial appraisal.
Okay. Okay. Thank
you. Right.
So just a quick illustration, Javier. We've got a client at the moment who's just inherited a house, and it's going to be quite an expensive house. Would they need to talk to a surveyor or appraiser now, or do we wait?
I would recommend to do so, because if they're going to be acquiring the property through a recognition of trust rights, or any type of inheritance, then yes, they're going to be paying a reverse capital gains tax on that acquisition, on top of the acquisition tax. Which the acquisition tax will also be based on an appraisal. It's just a different type of appraisal, but it will be taxed. They will be taxed on that acquisition. Now, the good thing is that if they're selling it at some point, is that I'm guessing that the property was acquired many years ago, and if it was acquired many years ago, the selling capital gains tax to be quite high because of the changes of the market and stuff like that. So I don't know how much the original owners bought it for, but I'm guessing they bought it for a lot less for between then and now they're probably selling it for a lot more. So that reverse capital gains tax and that acquisition tax that they're going to be paying now can be used as a deduction later for capital gains tax. So regardless, they're paying it on capital gains tax. The only difference is they're going to be paying less in the future because they're paying that reverse capital gains tax now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll talk to you about it separately because it'll probably involve you. So
Acquisition taxes in association are right. It used to be 1% when it matters when it was blood to blood, like father to son. So is that gonna still remain the same, Javier?
No, it also increased in Los Cabos municipality at least. It went from
1.5?
No, to 2%.
2%. Okay, from when blood to blood. And when there is no blood is 3%.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Be getting married just to sell a property.
Right? Exactly.
Any more questions? I mean, Javier is around and available if you have questions or need a closing attorney or real estate attorney. So if you haven't got his contact details, let your contacts at Ronival know and we'll share those with you. Okay. No other questions. We've got somebody trying to join now. He's missed it all. I'm sorry, Ben, you've missed it. We've recorded it though. Okay. All right, Javier, thank you so much for that. That was brilliant.
Thank
And I'm
you.
very happy about the commercial appraisal for sure.
Yes, it's good news. It's good news
It's
that
really
it's not
good news.
right.
Yeah. Okay. Bye bye, everybody. I'll share the recording if you need it.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much. Thank you, Javier.